before we can understand Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the temple, and that would be the second temple, we have to understand why they had to rebuild it. So it was tore down, and why was it tore down? So we got to ask some of these questions. So we're going to kind of do like, let's see, what's that called? Fireproof in 60 seconds. We're almost going to do that, but not quite. It'll take a little bit more than 60 seconds, but it's going to be an abbreviated look at the backstory behind this. So the house of Israel goes into captivity by Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and you can see it in the map here. We're talking specifically at this point about this group. So this group is coming up here into Nineveh. All right. So anyway, this group that went up in here, they went first. So if you remember, the two houses, Israel had been separated into two houses, 10 tribes and basically 2 tribes. And these 10 tribes went into exile up into this region up in here. And so we're looking at basically, this is Persia over here. But today this is Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, and I don't remember what's up here. Syria, yes. And those 10 tribes were exiled, and those are considered today still the 10 lost tribes because there was no distinct return of all 10 tribes. But we're going to be talking about focusing more on this group today because this is the group that returned for certain, and there were others that returned, but it was more of a mixed time, not a group of people that returned. Some of us today would think that we're part of the 10 lost tribes, and in heart we certainly are. Are we physically? I have no idea. But let's move on. So I will need some readers if we're going. And I picked and chose some passages out of here. But let me start off with this first part. This is in 2 Kings, and this is the beautiful part about this. Hopefully, this study is, I guess, was a reminder to me that basically the minor prophets, the majority of the minor prophets, and Kings and Chronicles is all about this story that we're talking about today. It's about Israel going into exile and them returning and the building of the second temple. Daniel is going to talk about this. Ezra, Esther, all of these are related to this story. And I'm hoping that as we lay this out a little bit, the story will begin to make sense because there's some passages that we're very familiar with, but how it fits in and plugs into the whole story is kind of fun for me to understand that better. So we're going to kind of read a story together today. So here we go. 2 Kings 16:18. And again, we're going to be bouncing around, and some of this is really weird. Ezekiel, some passages in Ezekiel or Isaiah are like after Ezra, but they were prophecies for Ezra, so things are out of order in most of our scriptures, but they all wove together, and that's fine. So they left all the commandments of Yahweh, their Elohim. So we're finding out right now why this group of people were sent into exile. They left all the commandments of Yahweh, their Elohim, made for themselves a molded image and 2 calves, made a wooden image and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, practiced witchcraft and soothsaying, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of Yahweh to provoke him to anger. Therefore Yahweh was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. So this is telling us that this group went first, the northern kingdom went first, the southern kingdom went later. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you look at the time frame here, we're looking at about 130 years difference between the two. And you would think Judah would say, well, I want to learn from my brothers. I don't want to make that same mistake. I know I tried to learn from my brothers, but I made my share of mistakes too, and I'm sure my younger brother learned from my mistakes. Interestingly enough, I know we've talked about this before when they settled the land, that some of them settled on this side. What I didn't know is that the half tribe of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben were the first ones to go. They're the first ones that were taken into exile. I think they were the easiest to get to. But they were first removed because they did go in different waves. And so that's a sad story, but it was the reality of it. Okay, somebody could read this then. And I'm going to need several readers today. Sorry.
And the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and dwelt in its cities.
All right. So when they took the people out, these kings actually took other people and put them in their place. And this is where they came from. So this would be the region where they came back in. So here's Kuhath right there, and Hama and Ava, Sepharim. They all were relocated. They just sent them a big bus. They loaded them up and hauled them away, and they settled in the land that these people had vacated. And their customs as well went with them. Then the Samaritans. So these then became known as the Samaritans because they were moved into the area of Samaria. Okay. They, the Samaritans, feared Yahweh because they learned a little bit about the customs that were there, but they served their own idols and gods as well, according to the rituals of the nations from among whom they were carried away. So they brought with them a mixed faith, and that plays into a problem as we move forward. So then we're going to talk about the southern kingdom. All right, so that's a quick picture of the northern kingdom, what happened to them, and why. Okay, now we're going to talk about the southern kingdom. That's primarily Judah, but there was 2.5 tribes involved in that. Jeremiah 25, 6-7 says, "Do not go after other gods to serve them and worship them, and do not provoke me to anger with the works of your hands, and I will not harm you. Yet you have not listened to me, says Yahweh, that you might provoke me to anger with the works of your hands to your own hurt." Okay, so we're finding out why. This is Jeremiah prophesying. Okay, he's prophesying that this is going to happen, and it ends up does happening, very specifically, but it's for 70 years, and it was Jeremiah that prophesied that. He wasn't very well loved for that prophecy, but we're going to find out now why it was 70 years. 2 Chronicles 36:21 says, "The land enjoyed its Sabbath rest. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of Yahweh spoken by Jeremiah." And the passage for that is here. But basically, while they were in the land, and they had the temple, they had the teachers, they had plenty of prophets teaching them the truth. They didn't obey. They didn't obey in all things, and one of those was they didn't let the land rest. And which would be a reason that somebody wouldn't let the land rest? Greed, absolutely. And also it requires great faith to not plant and to go into a year. I know for me, if I was asked to go into a winter with no wood and just trust that he's going to provide the wood, that would be a scary moment for me. I don't know that I'd want to do that. And that's basically what he was asking Israel to do. Don't plant. Trust me for this. And they didn't. And so he sent them into exile, and that land rested for 70 years. Yeah. And I know some families that base it on when they acquired their property too, and all of which are fine. They're all a rehearsal or remembrance of what the Father's doing. Either way, the land's got to rest. We thought about that here. It's like this had been a field, and I don't think before we bought it, and I don't remember it ever resting. It's always been a field, so we're just letting it rest, letting the sheep graze it now. Okay, so this is just another map showing the way that they went. So these were taken captive. The northern tribes taken captive by Assyria, and the southern tribe then taken captive by Babylon. And then the tribes coming back from that area and replacing them. Okay, so we're going to first talk about the exiles, and then we're going to talk about the returns. So this is the first exile, carted up and hauled away, as it were. And that one was an elephant. First exiles was all elephants, apparently. So keep an eye out, because there'll be different animals coming through. So this is talked about in various places, and it's fun to look at this because it's in Chronicles, it's in different places, the prophets. But this one's in Daniel, and this is just a picture here. If somebody will read Daniel 1, 1 and 2, it's a story that we're very familiar with.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And Yahweh gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of Elohim, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God.
Okay. So, because soon in Daniel, we're going to read about these characters and that they wouldn't bow to the Babylonian god, in which they were taken captive. So, and Daniel as well, they ended up being saved and lifted up and made to work for the king. But that's in Daniel, and they're serving in the land that they were taken captive. So Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were part of the first group that were taken captive, and some of the articles of the temple were taken as well, as we just read there. So not everybody was taken captive in the first one, but the second one, others were. We're going to read about the second exile now, and that one we added the lion, right? All right, all the way. This is in Esther. And then it says, Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jehoiakim, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And so who is this character? Mordecai. You've seen the movie. Good for you. And what is he not doing in this picture? He's not bowing either to Haman, right? To Haman. And it's interesting that those two stories are very similar. And he was taken captive, according to this, he was taken captive in the second one. He knows he could die, but he's being told to bow down to Haman, and he doesn't want to. And he didn't. Well, so anyways, right there, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So Nebuchadnezzar was responsible for the first two of these exiles. Now we're into the third exile. And what did we add in this one? A bear. Yeah. Because there's barely any people left. And this is the worst exile, sadly. Basically, King of Nebuchadnezzar had finally had it with the people. He sends somebody called Zebuzaradan, he's the one that actually burned it down, but he was the leader. But I think he was under Nebuchadnezzar's orders. Then they Zebuzaradan, burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem. Now, I highlighted that because we're going to be talking about the rebuilding of the wall. Burned all its palaces with fire and destroyed all its precious possessions. And those who escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, where they became servants to him and his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah, which said, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths, as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So understand, we're talking about Solomon's temple. It wasn't just the tabernacle. I mean, we're talking about Solomon's temple. And at this point, they knocked these down. This is where we're going to read about these pillars being broken down, and then the articles being hauled away and put into the king's treasury. Okay, now we love that passage, and it's an applicable passage for today. But if we understand it in context, this is verse 10. This is what Yahweh says: when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. So this was written to Judah that had gone into captivity. That's who it was written to. And why did they go into captivity? Disobedience, and also what I didn't read earlier is they rebelled against these kings. Judah had like 1, 2, or 3 different kings during this time, and each one of them said, "We're not paying our taxes. We're not going to do anything you tell us." And he'd come in and lay siege to them, and they were a problem to the kingdom. Yes.
So you're saying that the first two groups of people to be brought out had a longer sentence than the rest?
Yeah. It's interesting because there was actually 3. It's debatable because there was 3 returns too, and so some say Yahweh was exactly to his word, and that everybody stayed a certain period of time, 70 years exactly. But I'm not sure. That's a good study. You should do it. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use this verse, because they were going into captivity, and the Father was saying, "Hey, just know this day is going to come to an end, and I don't mean to destroy you. You are a remnant, and I'm going to bring you home. I want you to know that. But your sins have led you here, and there's consequences to sin. And when you come back, hopefully you come back changed. So that brings us then to the first wave of the return. Who wants to pronounce that king? Or it's not a king. Zerubbabel, yeah. As some say, I don't know what they say. Zerubbabel. Actually, it comes from the word Babylon. I think it means something in Babylon. It means born in Babylon, if I'm not mistaken. So, wow, that's interesting because it's a very good picture of us. We were born into sin, right? So, this is the first wave of people. This is King Cyrus now. So, this is that Nebuchadnezzar had been replaced now by a new king. His name's King Cyrus. Somebody read, and now we're in the book of Ezra. So, we've been moving around quite a bit. Ben, were you there to take that picture of King Cyrus? Yeah, paparazzi. I'll take it from there. Good job. Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying. So get ready to hear the proclamation of a king.
Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia. Oh, that scared me. All the kingdoms of the earth, Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me. And he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah.
Amazing. Why would he say that? Why would he say that?
I don't know. God's saying it.
Yeah, and this is one of those cases. This is where Isaiah, which is later in the Bible than Ezra, had a prophecy about Cyrus. And it says, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. So he read that, somebody read that to him, and he said, well, hey, I'm that man. And he fulfilled it. It's just amazing. So a king now, remember, we had kings that were penalizing Israel, putting them in slavery, and he's saying, hey, I'm going to build a temple for these guys. So we're going through Ezra here. We're bouncing through Ezra. Thoughts? Why did some people cry and why did some people rejoice?
They remember
They remember what?
the old temple.
What was so grand about the old temple?
The spirit of Yahweh was on it.
Well,
It was.
because it was completely lined with gold, it was probably, it may have, I don't know what in relation, but it was certainly larger.
Yeah, I think it was larger. That most scholars think that when they looked at the foundation, they could see that it's going to be a smaller footprint than it was previously. But some people that didn't know that, they were happy for whatever they're going to get, right? Not only that, but the second temple, and you have to remember, this is the temple we're talking about that's going to be built now that Yeshua is going to go into, okay? Now it's going to get renovated a few times. It's going to get grander. Herod's going to really, really improve it. But it's basically the same temple, same footprint to some degree. But there's something missing in this one, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant got carried away and never did return. I think it will someday. I think it's out there. I think in Yahweh's time it'll be revealed. I think that'll be a cool day. And what the people who wept didn't know is that this is Solomon's temple. And this is the second temple, the one that replaced it. But it's after it's been improved by Herod. Herod spent a lot of money. So another leader says, hey, I'm going to add to the temple as well. And so it's going to be grand, but it's not going to be grand right away. Matter of fact, some people say it was a wooden structure. Well, the tabernacle was made of animal skins, so I'll take wood. All right, so we're gonna do a summary in Ezra 4. This is interesting, and when at first reading of this, it kind of bothered me, and I had a hard time grasping this a little bit because it says that basically the people, when Ezra said, we're going to build now, we're going to build in this land, we're going to rebuild the temple, the people said, well, we want to help the people that were living there now. Now remember, where did those people come from? From not Israel, from other places. And did they worship Yahweh? Yeah, it says they did. They worshiped him. They worshiped him too. They worshiped him as well as all the other gods, right? So they offered to help, and Ezra said, "No, no, um, we're gonna do this on our own. You're not welcome to help because of the polluted faith that they had. They wanted to do this right. Remember, they're going into captivity because many of them had gone into captivity because of idol worship, because of lack of obedience. So they were denied. Then the people said, well, if you're not going to let us help, then we're going to make it difficult for you to build here. And so they tried everything they could to frustrate the builders. They even hired counselors during Cyrus's reign to prevent them from hiring or prevent them from building. When that didn't work, then they tattled. I'm going to tell. And they, you guys never say that, do you? I'm going to tell Mom. My brother says I used to do that to him all the time. Well, I had a lot to tell. Goodness sakes. So they went and told the new king, who had replaced Cyrus, King Artaxerxes, and they said, these people, they always rebel, they never pay their taxes, and you should check the history, and you'll see what we mean. So he got out the books, and they checked the records, and he said, oh, yeah, they better stop building. And he told them to stop building, and they did for 18 years. They didn't build another thing. 18 years it laid there. So that the first guy was Zerubbabel, and he brought back the people that started building the temple, and they built a lot of it. They built the foundation, and later they ended up building the rest of the temple. But this is where things overlap a little bit between Zerubbabel and Ezra, because it's in the same book and in the other books too. Ezra brought back another group of people. He brought back the priests. He brought back the teachers. He brought back the priesthood and the temple service is what he brought back. Zerubbabel, he brought back the building itself. He was in charge of building the building. Ezra, so I have to understand that Ezra was a learned scribe and teacher. Matter of fact, the rabbis today say that if Moses hadn't brought the Torah, that Ezra would have. That's how lofty they feel about Ezra, which is interesting. It doesn't say that in the scripture, but it's an interesting thought. So he was well respected and very much in step with the Father. After the work had stopped, the prophets, and if we read Haggai and Zechariah, you'll see that these were two of the people that were encouraging the people, obey Yahweh. Don't be disheartened. We need to press forward. And it was their encouragement that got them to start building again. So they started building again. Nothing had changed. They just started building again. The opposition came up and said 18 years later and says, oh, wait a minute. Who says you could build? And they said, well, we had permission by King Cyrus, which they had before, but they didn't mention it before. They just stopped working. So we're just going to build because King Cyrus says we can. So you can stop us if you want. So what'd they do? They tattled to the king. They went and told, but it was Darius now, and they wrote to Darius and said, hey, these people, check your records. They say that King Cyrus says they can build, but we don't think that's the case. No way. So he looked in the records, and he gave a decree. He says, also I, Darius, issue a decree that whoever alters this edict. So what was the edict? And I didn't cover that part, but basically he looked in the records and found that King Cyrus had said so. Yeah, we're not only supposed to let you build, but we're supposed to help fund it. And so he issues this decree. Whoever alters this edict, let a timber be pulled from his house and erected, and let him be hanged on it, and let his house be made a refuse heap because of this. And may the Elohim who caused his name to dwell there destroy any king or people who put their hand to alter it, or to destroy this house of Elohim which is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, issue a decree. Let it be done. Let it be written. And let it be done diligently. So we've had Cyrus and Darius both now say, hey, you guys, you should build. It's a good thing. We're in Ezra 7 now. And now Ezra, he talks with King Artaxerxes. And he has favor with King Artaxerxes. And King Artaxerxes says, well, I'll provide you with funds from the king's treasury. But this is what happened. Ezra very wisely told the king that basically those who bless Israel will be blessed, those who curse Israel will be cursed, in so many words, and says basically, your whole house could come crumbling down if you don't bless Israel. And so he says, well, wait a minute, I don't want my house to come crumbling down, so whatever you need, I will provide it. Tax-free, no less. They were not to be taxed. And then there was penalties for anyone who tried to stop them. So if people tried to impede them, they were going to be in trouble themselves. Death was one of the options. So the first returners, the ones that came with Zerubbabel, they had an escort by the king, and Ezra had told the king, hey, our Yahweh is mighty in Israel, and so then he didn't want to come to him and say, but we need an escort because we don't have any faith. So he honestly thought about that, and he prayed about that, and so he said, we're going to go. Because remember, he gave him 100 talents of silver and all kinds of, he also sent with them some of the gold items that were from the treasury that belonged in the temple and people. And he sent them back on the journey from the river, and they left in faith. They stepped out in faith. And the hand of Elohim was upon us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and from ambush along the road. So we came to Jerusalem and stayed there 3 days. So that was a big step of faith by Ezra. That brings us then, that's the backstory, that brings us to Nehemiah. The third wave of returners. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few passages here, and we're going to read chapter 4. Okay, that's where the bulk of this study is. And then we're going to do a couple summaries and a couple other chapters. But we're going to read chapter 4 together. That's where the bulk of this is. But so here's some of the summaries. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. All right. Let's see. Mariam, will you read that?
It came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire.
Okay. So if we boil it down in a nutshell, what were the two things that were on his heart? This is Nehemiah asking.
Definitely the security of the city.
The security of the city and the security of the people. How are the people? How is the place? So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before Elohim of heaven. And then further on in Nehemiah, and basically, I'll summarize this bit. He goes before the king with his cup, because he's the cupbearer for the king, and he said he's never been sad in the king's presence before. Probably not supposed to be. I'm not saying he's a joker, one of those kind of guys, but yeah.
He was allegedly the king's friend.
I'm sure he was.
Because he had to be in order to have that position.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he would have been a taster too?
Probably.
Yeah.
Because I recently had a history study in my American history. They have Bible history as well. And in the chapter that I read, they said cupbearer, he tasted all of the food.
Right.
And he was the one he was like one of the only people who could directly deliver it to the king.
Yes.
So he must have had to taste at least a little bit of everything.
Right.
And he was much more than just a servant. He was like a friend. He was someone the king knew very well.
Right. There's an intimate relationship there. Yeah. If he gets COVID, then the king's going to get COVID too. So the king says, so why are you so sad? And he basically tells him, well, why shouldn't my face be sad? That's when the city, the place of my father's tombs lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire. And the king doesn't say, don't ever act sad in front of me ever again. Next, I want another cupbearer. He says, what do you request? That's amazing. We see a big heart change here between the first kings that put him in exile and these other kings that are giving him proclamations and giving him rights and giving him funding and all this. There's a big change. And then it goes on. Let's just read more. Please, king. then he asked, basically, he tells him, I love this because he didn't just say, hey, can I go back? You want to know what I want. So I want to go back by myself to Jerusalem and check it out. He says, hey, arrange for me to be able to get some timber. And he thinks this through. And he asks, he knows what the king's got at his disposal. And he sends him with permission to go and letters so that it's authorized. So this is my question to you real quickly. This is Artaxerxes at this point. Why is this, and I didn't really give you a fair try at that, but why is this king so willing to help, do you think? Besides what you just said, that was good. They're good friends. Very possibly. And I didn't give you a chance to read it here, but basically, then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him. This is Artaxerxes, and some think that he was the son of Xerxes. The son is what they think. And some have said it might be her child, and some said that it's probably from another wife. But either way, this queen may have been Esther sitting there. Either way, we're talking about influence. We're talking about influence, a lot of influence. And probably at this point, she wasn't that pretty. She's getting a little older anyway. And then we have another proclamation. This is the last proclamation that we have going on. Ezra 1:13. Somebody read this in a proclamation voice. David.
I, Artaxerxes, issue a decree that all those of the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites in my realm who volunteer to go up to Jerusalem may go with you.
Excellent.
Amen.
Excellent. And so he goes. And when he arrives there, he sees the distress. And when he says this, come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. And I highlighted that because that's an interesting thought. And I want to ask you what you think about that as we move on. And I told them of the hand of Elohim, which had been good upon me, and also the king's words that he had spoken to me. And they said, get out of here. We don't want you around here. We got in trouble last time that we tried to build something. No, they didn't, did they? They said, let us rise up and build. And they set their hands to work. They didn't say, let's rise up and build and let's get those guys over there to do it. I'm busy. They started helping immediately. But what do you think? What does that mean? That we may no longer be a reproach. Yeah.
A God with no buildings, a God with no stuff back then, was a God who didn't really have any power. He didn't have any oomph. So to the other gods of the land, obviously the other people of the land, their God looked pretty bad at this point. Oh, he brought you back, and he told you to do all these things, and no, you can't do them. Guess your God's not so big. So they knew the things were not God, but the things were necessary to be able to show everyone who God was, in a way.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to be a light if your light isn't streaming again?
Excellent question. Excellent points. They felt they were a reproach, and that they weren't showing the blessing. They want to show that they've been blessed. Matter of fact, it's in ruins. Whenever we see ruins today, there's not many ruins around here because we're not as ancient, it would seem, civilization-wise. But if you go into the old country, as Barney Fife would say, there's a lot of ruins over there, and it usually means a failed civilization. Yeah, the Mayans, for example. And it's a picture of failure. So we're going to be looking at 3 losers here. Their names are Tobiah, Sanballat, and Gershom. Let's say it together. Tobiah, Sanballat, Gershom. Whenever we hear their voice, their words, because these guys they're basically naysayers. They're like, oh, you can't do it. What are you doing here? You don't want us to help, then we don't want you to be successful. Blah, 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 blah. And so just like at Purim, when we say, whenever we hear the word Haman, we make noisemakers and various things, right? We're going to do that with these guys too. Tobiah, we're going to say boo. Sanballat, we're going to say hiss. Gershom, grrr. So look for those. So, Here's a given for you. I made it easy for you. Somebody read Nehemiah 2:17-20, and when we hear, after they say the name, we can say the appropriate sound.
But when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, and Geshem, the Arab, heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king?"
So they're already challenging them, right? So I answered them and said to them, "The God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we his servants will arise and build. But you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem." So it's kind of the same people for the same reasons, because they wanted to worship God in their own way. So then that takes us to Nehemiah chapter 3. And this is a summary. Basically, it describes the rebuilding of the walls and gates. And this is a fascinating read. I would encourage you to read through that. But it's interesting because it lists the types of people and what they did. I mean, this is cool. It'd be almost like, okay, so Mike, your house where you live. Somebody built a house back in the day. I don't know who. Do you know who? Oh, do you know all the helpers that helped? Okay. Well, it'd be like a list of all the helpers and what they did, and almost maybe like signing, like the trim or something like that, because they want to be remembered for what they had done. It's kind of like that. So the types of people who helped it, and the list is the high priest and the priests. They all lended a hand. The people of Jericho, Zanoah, Beth Hesarem, Mizpah, Beth-zur. So these are the villages in the area, because when the people came back, they're not all living in Jerusalem because there's no safety there either. So they might as well live out in the plain. Levites, Keilah, men of the plain, people of Ophel, and then we find merchants, and these are people that are laying bricks or big stones. Merchants, goldsmiths, perfumers are listed, and then the daughters of YHWH. I think they must have been farmers' daughters. I don't know. And then this is a good map. I didn't make this, and we don't have to go over it all, but basically each one of these gates had to be, the gates are burned. So it lists like who redone this gate, who put it together and who hung it, who did the hinges, who filled in the section between here and here. And that's just basically what this book is about. Here's the dung gate on this end. And somebody was famous for rebuilding that. But it had to be enclosed for there to be safety. Well, it's actually interesting because one of the times that Jerusalem was surrounded and taken captive, the king he tried to escape through the dung gate. He was pooped out of the city, and he was captured. And sadly, they murdered all his sons before his eyes, and then he put his eyes out. And then they took him back to Babylon, and he died in the dungeons. It was a sad tale. Was he dead? Was he? Yes, he was, and that's a good question. Sadly, all the kings during his time says that they were more wicked than their father. They were more wicked than the previous king. It just was going south, and it wasn't going north. So the southern kingdom was going south at that time. All right, don't forget these people. All right, Tim. Read on.
But it so happened, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant, and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" Now Tobiah, the Ammonite, was beside him, and he said, "Whatever they build, even if a fox goes up on it, he will break down the stone wall."
So we'll talk about trying to undermine them, right, and discourage them. Very much so. The focus is on the rubbish. Or what? Have you seen any English movies or English sitcoms or anything? Everything is rubbish, right? Oh, that's rubbish.
Isn't that what they call their compost piles? The rubbish heap?
Oh, it could be. Chapter 4. Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads. This is Ezra's response, I think. And give them, or no, Nehemiah's response. And give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Sounds like David at this point, in his frustration. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. I think he's provoked anger too, by the way. So we built the wall, and the entire wall is joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Another reader.
Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah,
Boo.
the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to counterattack Jerusalem and create confusion. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night.
You know, they said that Nehemiah, he's also known for prayer. There's 14 prayers in a short book of Nehemiah. And the very first one, we didn't really cover it, but basically when the king asks him, well, what can I do for you? He prays first before he answers the king. It's really interesting. So they want to cause confusion. Confusion is from the enemy. Okay, so we have to kind of picture this. There was rubbish. There was ruins. There was big blocks scattered here, here, and here, here. And it's like a perfect place to go and play paintball. I mean, you can hide everywhere, right? And so they don't feel safe, and they feel that people could come up and get near and then charge in. And that's what they're planning to do, actually. And the people said, this is what they're planning to do, so you need to do something about it. And so, therefore, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows, weapons. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember Yahweh, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. And it happened when our enemies heard that it was known to us, and that so basically when Israel figured out, oh, this is what their plan is, this is what the enemy's plan is, and they put up a defense, then the enemy got ticked off. And this is pretty cool, because this is like a spirit. If you want to take Satan off, just let him know that I know what you're trying to do here. And pray a hedge of protection, or lay hands on something, or approach the Father in prayer, and it'll just tick him right off. Not that it makes him any more powerful. It doesn't. It just makes him more irritated. And so it was from that time on that half the servants worked at construction, while the other half held the spears, the shields, the bows, and wore armor. And the leaders were behind all the house of Judah, and those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction, and with the other held a weapon. So it says those that carried burdens too. So if you're carrying some bricks, you're gonna carry a shield or a weapon in this hand, slingshot or something. I think a brick would be a good weapon. Yeah. Every one of the builders had his sword girded at his side as he built, and the one who sounded the trumpet was behind me. That's where the saying comes, you don't want to be caught with your pants down. No, I'm kidding. So they were making a mad dash to this. We're going to work hard at this. We're going to have somebody just come on in and stay here. They're working 24/6 at this point. I'm sure they're resting on the Sabbath day. But they're working hard at it. And what does this mean for the people at home, which there's probably the wife and the children? They're not protected. They're not protected. Yeah. So it's not just a hard work, but it's also a sacrifice. And a faith issue. It's a trust issue too. That if this work is worthy, the Father will protect our children and our wives. And the enemy never figured out, well, let's just go and deal with them. They just kept, yeah, hallelujah. That's the Father.
Kind of interesting that they we took our clothes off for washing. It's like pointing out, everybody worked all the time, either guarding or working. We never took our clothes off. We just kept working or guarding. Except that everyone did take them off for washing.
Right.
Just in case anyone was worried.
Yeah, they didn't get that. Seemed like an odd thing.
It's for the wives, okay?
Is that what that's for?
Probably.
Because I was going to use it as a good argument. I don't have to change out my work clothes there. I'm just going to, fall asleep here. All right, so that's basically all of chapter 4. So then we're back to the summaries of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, here's the people's financial burden. So chapter 5 is interesting because they're basically getting the wall rebuilt, and they're being successful at that. But he then finds out that the people are complaining because they're financially destitute, and they're doing it to themselves. It's not that King Cyrus or somebody else is taxing them. Their own people are taxing them. They come into the land and they needed to borrow money, and so they've enslaved one another, and they've been charging an exorbitant fee. So Nehemiah says, "Hey, wait a minute. We're just trying to survive here, so we're going to let people borrow for free." He says, I'm letting people borrow money and resources, and I'm not charging them a thing. You do the same. And so they actually canceled all these debts. Then he says, now, he was actually the governor. He was appointed governor of Judah at that time. He says, I'm supposed to be able to tax you and be paid money, and I'm not charging you anything. It's kind of like Trump working for free. He says, what is more, I have 150 people at my table that I'm feeding every day. And it lists what he has: an oxen and something else, several things that they eat every day. Tell him, if you had one of your oxen every night, how long would that last?
Well, they don't eat at the table, I can tell you that.
Well, I mean, if we would run out of oxen and
Had
just...
to kill one every day to feed everybody.
3 days?
3 days, be done.
Yep. So he's got plenty. Okay. So then we're going to just read a little bit more in chapter 6. All right. Ellie, you're up.
Now it happened when
Sanballat.
Tobiah, Gershom, and the rest of your enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and that there was no bricks left in it, though at the time I had not hung the doors in the gate. That Sanballat and Gershom sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Owen." Oh no! They thought to do me harm. So I sent messengers to them, saying, "I am doing a great work, so that I can't come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you?"
So the wall's almost done. And so they said, well, we can't actually break in and stop them anymore. And, I mean, now they have a defense. So what are we going to do? Well, we'll try some conspiracies of what they wanted to do. So they basically said, hey, why don't you come on down here and let's talk about this. And, they had plans to either capture him or if nothing else, just distract him. What's that? Yeah. And basically he says, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't have time for this right now. Whatever is your problem. And so I'm just going to ignore you for now. And that didn't go over very well. So the next thing they did was Sanballat. He threatens to tell the king that Nehemiah is planning a rebellion. So he says, well, I'm going to let the king know that you're planning a rebellion and that you plan to set up your own kingdom and be a king. And he says, well, you're just making this stuff up. I don't buy it. You can tell him if you want, but it's not true. Yeah. So then they tried another one because he didn't come down. He didn't give him the time of day. So they actually gave him somebody came and said, hey, I hear that they're planning to kill you. And so you really should go into the temple and run to the temple and you'll be safe there. Yeah, well, this is supposed to be an Israelite he was actually a double agent or a single agent. He was actually working for the opposition. He was a spy is what it says. And he said, "Man, I'm not running for my life." And then he realizes it's not just a trap to kill him, it was a trap to defame him. Say, "Oh, look at your leader. He just ran for his life, and there was nobody even going to hurt him." And he was just terrified. And then that, how fear can multiply. And so I think the story kind of leads that he figured that out after the fact. So that didn't work either. So the wall was finished then on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. That was fast. That was really fast. They really worked hard. So they actually got the wall built. It was amazing. And it happened when all our enemies heard of it, and all the nations around us saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was done by God. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So, ramparts, I didn't tell you what the ramparts are, but basically these are ramparts up here. Anywhere up on the top of a wall or a fortification around a city is where you have protection. You can hide right in here and shoot arrows down, and you can spy on your enemies and various things, and the enemy can't get you. Whereas on the ruins on the ground, then it's hand-to-hand combat. Applications that I think I learned in this process. 10 applications based on the stories that we just read. We should always be concerned about his people and his place. That's the example that he gave us. Yahweh is concerned about that as well. He blessed them to return. So his people and his place primarily. I mean, it doesn't mean we shouldn't worry about other people and be concerned about them. We should. But our first concern should be for our brothers and sisters. And in Nehemiah 2:17 it says, Nehemiah told the Jewish leaders, you see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be a disgrace. And that's what I was talking about earlier about reproach or disgrace. It speaks to Yahweh not being powerful. Because I've wondered before, why did he allow Solomon to build such a massive temple? Wouldn't that be a distraction? But it was to his glory. It was holy. It was a right thing to do. In that case, it was kind of interesting. Number 2, we need vision hearers and vision supporters. Whatever your vision, you might receive a vision yourself, and then you hope people will support that. Melanie and I, as you know, we have a vision for City on a Hill, and this study isn't just about City on a Hill. It's about anything in your life that has gone from ruins, or that you know of that is ruins. They can go to ramparts. It can become part of. It can be something of a victory that you can stand upon. Okay, but we heard a vision, and I tell you what, it's hard to share a vision. Why do you think it's hard to share a vision with people? They could be to shreds. They might not believe you. Moses was given a word by Yahweh at the burning bush. What was his first concern? His voice. But after that, they won't believe me. So I've been asking the Father, give me a staff. I want a staff so I can throw it on the ground. Or I don't really want leprosy on my hand, but it would be handy. Oh, by the way, we're supposed to build a building or buy some land. Well, look at that. What do you think? Okay. Where there is vision, there is also adversity, based on what we just read. And you could almost say in reverse, if there's no adversity, there's no vision. You're playing right into the enemy's hands if he's not coming against you and what you feel is right in the Father's eyes. So if life is just cool, it's because like right now all the you can't hardly stand to watch CNN or anything like that right now because they're just like, oh, everything is so good. The stars have aligned. Everything is good, because they're happy right now and there's no opposition for them. So they would feel. That's a horrible example, really. But the point is that if the Father's going to give a vision, there's going to be somebody to come. Matter of fact, it's interesting because we had 3. We had Zerubbabel, we had Ezra, and we had Nehemiah. 3 waves that came back. How many adversary people did we have? Yeah. Sanballat and the other two. And we don't even have to remember their names because we can just forget their names, just call them by hiss and grr and boo, right? Be generous, but expect Yahweh to provide in miraculous ways. Okay, so let's just talk about that a little bit. There was no way they were going to be able to build all of that with just the resources that they brought with them. It was these kings out of nowhere that says, hey, here's 100 talents of gold. Here, go get some trees from Lebanon. I got it covered. The Father is going, so we don't have to plan, and you don't have to plan in your life. It can't happen because we don't have the finances. We don't have the resources. I don't see it, so therefore I can't. If the Father's telling me, nah, I can't do it. Yahweh restores in waves. They return in waves, and they were put in exile in waves. And we've seen this phenomenon ourselves. There's people returning in different waves, and the waves aren't over. That's one thing about waves, they continue. So there'll be more waves coming. I think Amy talked a little bit about it, about how people are getting, whether it's the books or whether it's the times or whatever, but people are getting more interested in the feast days or the scriptures in general, not just the New Testament anymore. Yeshua's name, somebody else mentioned that. It's like it's becoming more commonplace. And it's like, yes, that's right. People are hungry. We need to be ready. Restoration requires faith like Ezra. What do you remember in the story? In what way did Ezra demonstrate faith? The king told him to go ahead, you have permission to return to the land. He said, we prayed about it, they fasted, and they set out and trusted the Father to protect them. We need to do that too in our lives. The Father's going to ask us to do things, and sometimes we just have to step out in faith. If you want to get somewhere you've never been, you can probably answer this question. You've got to be willing to do things you've never done before. So, things that we've never done. Okay, so yeah, I don't have a clue what the Father wants to do with City on the Hill or with each one of us individually. But if we want to, if we say, I want to be a person that is willing to pray for people on the street. I want to be a person that has the answer when somebody says, I'm beat down and I'm sad, and I want to be able to give them hope. Then we got to be willing to do things that we've never done before, because if we continue with our current status, nothing's going to change. If you're too shy to talk to somebody, to share your faith, you're never going to. So we need to practice, rehearse, or we need to change the way that we're living and thinking so that things will be different for us. Number 8, change is hard. Change is hard. How many can remember? How many were here for this? I know Melanie and I were. So where is it? That's right here. Right here. Yeah. Benaiah, Josiah, Ellie, and Danbury. And this was this was horseshoes. I don't know what you guys did with it, but the point is that we don't know. You look around us right now. Today is this is a good time for this study because it's cold out, it's COVID, and we just had a change of leadership. People are frustrated. People are sick, various things. And so our numbers are really sparse, and they have been sparse this whole past year, it seems. Could it be because of the vision? It's a possibility. People like the small fellowship. I get that. Change is hard, but it doesn't stay hard. We're glad we moved down here. It's a lot better than it was upstairs. And what the Father leads us someplace else. It'll be hard for a while because we're used to this, but we shouldn't let it distract from what the Father wants to do. Now we saw the temple, right? The second temple. The people that cried and moaned because they saw the foundation, but they were short-sighted. They didn't see how grand that temple was going to be in time. It just had to get started. They walled it in, and we didn't read this part, but they walled it in, and then they said, okay, who's going to live there? Because people lived out in the area, and it said all of a sudden people started to come. And then they basically drew straws and said 1 out of 10 people, they went and checked the books. Who returned from the land? And he said, okay, we're going to just draw straws, and 1 out of 10 is going to move into Jerusalem, behind the city wall. And they began to fill it up. Yeah, that's a possibility. You build it and they will come. I don't know. something for us to think about is, you may not know this, but we're close. We're close to almost having enough money to buy the land. What land? I don't know. We're still looking. But it's coming. Things are in motion. That's exciting. But also, don't be a sandballot. Right. Because, for instance, the people who cried and moaned and in this case, they were frustrating people without knowing it. And in this case, Father was gracious because the people that rejoiced drowned them out, right? Okay. But we don't want to be a sandballot, because a sandballot wants to say, no, you don't want to do that. I mean, if you build it, no one's going to come. A fox will go up on it and tear it all down. So, at the very least, let's not discourage the vision. Whether it's this, whether it's our children's vision. If our child says, hey, I want to, I don't know. What would somebody, I want to be an actor. Well, maybe discourage that. No, I'm kidding. Just say, well, hey, in America, you can do anything you want to do. You can't say that necessarily to be true in any other nation, but in America, it is a possibility. Anybody can be anything. And there's various reasons. It might be because I don't have the talents to do it myself, so therefore you shouldn't. That's the same story that Sanballat had. Well, if I can't build it, then you can't either. I'm telling. But rather, let's be willing to be Ezra. So Ezra's name means help. His name actually means help. Let's be a help. So how do we be a help? And that's what I want to go over just a little bit. In the story that we read, there were hands-on helpers, right? Hands-on helpers. There was merchants, there was daughters, there was perfumers, there was goldsmiths, and how can I help? I'll do anything, whatever. They didn't sit around and say, wait a minute, when you get to the gold part, I will help. Or when you finally need some perfume because you've been wearing the same clothes for a month, then I'll help. No, they helped with the mortar, or they helped with whatever. You can also help by showing an interest. Just showing an interest in somebody's life, or the activities or things that are going on, your child's life. My wife does a really fantastic job of when I come home, she asks me, how was your day? And she shows an interest in what I do, and I appreciate that. Another way we can be a help is to be an encouragement. So first of all, let's not cut one another down and say it's impossible, or you haven't heard from the Father, or whatever. But then let's also replace that. Let's be encouraging to one another. And because let's think about this, people. I've talked to some of you. Some of you have vision. It's exciting about the ways that City and Hill can minister in the future. I've heard people talk about marriage retreats. I've heard people talk about growing the worship team. I've heard things about getting the youth more involved with helping to teach and various things. I can't think of how many more possible ideas you may have in ways that we can be a blessing to the community and to one another. Let's encourage each other in that and support them. Finance. Obviously anybody can help with finance, and a lot of you have been helping with finance, but let's not forget that it may be the community that wants to help at some point. I don't know. When Israel left in the Exodus, what were they told to do with their neighbors? Yeah, load us up. We got a temple to build. We may have to ask some people for help, and maybe the Father will give us grace or favor. And then the last two is influence and prayer. So influence. So when I was talking about influence, I'm talking about why was that one king, Xerxes, potentially, it's a theory, why was he so willing to say, hey, yeah, absolutely, take here's some gold. And all of the kings, they were willing. What's that? Very true. I mean, it might have been that Esther and Mordecai. What did Mordecai do? He saved the king's life, right? And what did Esther do? She was a very not only beautiful person outside, but beautiful inside. And she was willing to lay her life down for her friends, for her. Who cannot but admire those qualities in people? And so they had influence with the kings. We can do the same thing. We can, by our life and by our being a good neighbor to our people around us, and And when they see the tzitzits, they don't think, oh, that's anyone wearing a tzitzit. I had a bad experience with somebody wearing a tzitzit or a head covering or something like that. Or somebody who says Yeshua, they don't love on one another. We want to be a good influence, give good influence to others to make it possible for things in the future. And then finally, prayer. As I said before, he prayed 14 times in that book alone. So prayer is very powerful. So in closing, I feel that the fruit of rebellion is ruins. That's what they were accused of, and that's what they did. They rebelled first against Yahweh and then against the kings around them, and it brought ruin. And finally, and the fruit of revival is ramparts.